All right, welcome back, everybody. My name is Dave. Thanks for being here again on my humble little platform. Got a special guest today. You may know him, you may not know him. He's a first time guest on this program, but he's well known because of his work over at antiwar.com, which is just a go to website. He is actually the news editor over there, and the content, I gotta say, is some of the best content on the internet. So if you want to find out what's really going on, check out antiwar.com. Everybody, please welcome Dave DeCamp. Dave, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's first time, long time. You know what I mean? So let's talk about Zelensky. There's this article that I read, and maybe you could comment a little bit on this. He's talking about that he needs more weapons and he needs them faster.
hmm
Obviously, things might not be going well over in Ukraine. You're not really getting a whole lot of information from the mainstream press here in the United States and in the West in general. What's your take on why Zelensky seems to be getting a little, hot and bothered about the weapons and needing them so quickly?
Yeah, well, that's been his message lately. Is that he wants the deliveries to speed up, and I mean, if you look at the battlefield, we've seen in over the past month, about over the past few weeks, it looks like Russia's starting to make some gains after they've been kind of locked in battle in the east there in Donetsk around that city of Bakhmut. And the narrative has kind of been shifting because for months it was, oh, Ukraine's winning, Ukraine's winning. But recently we've seen reports of US and Western officials saying, and Germany, their intelligence saying, wow, Ukraine's really taken a lot of heavy losses in that area. Hundreds of casualties, hundreds being killed every day. And now we're starting to see the battle lines change a bit as Russia's starting to break through. So that's definitely, a major factor. And Zelensky just got his tanks promised to him last week, and pretty much that night in his nightly address, he said, "Okay, we need fighter jets now, and we need longer range missiles." And I think part of the reason too is that the tanks are going to take a while to get to the battlefield. The ones that the U.S. promised, the Abrams tanks, they're going to buy them for Ukraine. So that could take years. They have to be manufactured. There's contracts, and I'm sure they could bypass a lot of that. But yeah, they're going to have to train them. That's going to take years. So it's really the Leopard, the German-made tanks that Germany's sending, and it looks like Poland and Finland and a few other countries. So they might get a few hundred of them. Although I'm not really sure yet if they're going to even get that many. But even those are going to take a few months, and right now they're taking losses. And when it comes to that battle in the east there, I'm not really sure how practical the tanks would be to repel Russia's gains there. I'm just not a military guy, so I'm not really sure. But I think just in general, they're starting to face these losses, and he needs to speed it up, and he's not afraid to ask for more. Zelensky and Ukrainian officials, even though their entire war effort is dependent on this aid from the U.S. and its allies, they've said it themselves that they wouldn't be able to be fighting without it. They're just not afraid to kind of insult, Germany for taking too long, or like Zelensky, when he addressed Congress, he said, yeah, we've got a lot of stuff, but we need more. That's always their message. And I think it's kind of an important thing to show people how they are demanding more and more, because we've spent so much on this war already. I mean, over $100 billion. It's an incredible amount of money. And they're just, if the U.S. wants to keep supporting this war, they're going to have to, up those numbers a lot. So, it really shows what kind of the U.S. is investing in this, and what it has to do in the future if they want to keep Ukraine, surviving in this battle.
Yeah, and I've heard about F-16s. Is that actually a thing? Are they looking to get U.S. made F-16s, or and obviously those can be moved a lot quicker if they were able to get the U.S. to invest in that. I think that would really escalate the war if that's the case.
Yeah, so that's what they seem to be focusing on now, is that they want the fighter jets, the U.S. or French-made fighter jets they're looking at, but the F-16s is a big one. And we've seen Pentagon officials say, "Oh, we're not sending them F-16s," but they said the same things about the Abrams tanks. And now there was just a report in Politico over the weekend that there is a faction of officials in the Pentagon that want to send the F-16s, and they're kind of pushing the case, and the momentum is going in that direction. And yeah, you mentioned escalation. I mean, sending fighter jets like that. That's just a huge escalation. And since the U.S. and Germany said they're going to send the tanks, we've seen Russian officials really kind of step up their warnings. And throughout the war, they've been saying that the U.S. and NATO are directly involved. But I mean, over the past week, just looking at Russian media, it's like it's not just the foreign minister, the Kremlin. It's like every Russian official you can imagine is warning, you're going too far. And then there's all these reports too that the U.S. is going to help them attack Crimea, and that the U.S. just isn't worried about escalation anymore. And their whole reasoning is because up to this point, Russia hasn't used a nuke or attacked like or bombed a NATO base or something. That's their logic. That's how like dangerous this is that the people in charge of it are just that's their line of thinking right now. It's really a dangerous situation.
Yeah. Are there any United States politicians pushing back from either political party?
I mean, there's some Republicans, and it's a small, number of House Republicans mostly, it seems like, but it is significant, I think. If you remember the $40 billion Ukraine aid bill that they passed, I think that was last May. That was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
It was about 57 House Republicans voted against it. So that's not enough to really make a difference, but it's significant, and I think it's growing, the opposition, just because, again, it's being dragged out, and Americans, what they've been dealing with inflation and everything, I think they're more just regular people are like, why are we spending all this money on this war? I mean, I think at first a lot of people brought the propaganda, but as it drags out, people are just gonna more and more people are against it, and I think that's going to be reflected in Congress to some extent, by the few politicians who do care what their constituents think. And then also within the administration, I mean, a few months ago, Mark Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking U.S. military official, was saying we should talk about peace talks this winter. But he was, nobody else was into that in the State Department or the National Security Council. They just said, no, we're going full steam ahead here. Sorry, General. And we've seen a lot of examples of this over the years of the State Department, of the Secretary of State being much more hawkish than the military officials. Although Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, I mean, he's been pretty horrible this whole time.
Yeah. How do you deal with this, Dave? I mean, you've obviously been at this for quite some time. Some people are, like you mentioned, they're kind of converting over to this philosophy because they realize, okay, the left, they used to be kind of like the anti-war party way back when. The right, for a long time, except like you say, more recently, they've been just, full steam ahead. Now it seems like everybody is mostly full steam ahead. And you're this guy out here with this website and this philosophy, and people are looking at it now going, okay, maybe these guys are right. But does it get discouraging, to you put this information out every day, and like I say, antiwar.com, Libertarian Institute as well. You guys put out great information, but I don't see a lot of media coverage. You guys kind of, you stealth around on media platforms like mine, and you've got your own over on YouTube, I believe, right? Antiwar.com. You can get anti-war news. Mm-hmm. There seems to be, okay, let me put it this way. There should be a really big demand for this information. I'm kind of surprised that it's not more in demand.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So my articles that I write in the news section, we have a pretty decent sized readership, but it's not huge. But those articles that I write, short, kind of simple articles, some of those have a really big reach. Like they get reprinted by Zero Hedge. Caitlin Johnstone, she uses my stuff and like quotes me a lot, and her articles go all over the place. So we have a decent sized reach. But yeah, it does get discouraging. I mean, for me, I shouldn't really complain too much because I've only been doing it for a few years. But, Eric Garris, my boss, who founded the website with Justin Raimondo, who passed away in 2019, they've been doing this for over 25 years now, and they were right. They were right about the Iraq War. They were right about Kosovo. They were right about all this stuff. They were right about Russiagate. And still, it doesn't feel like it almost feels like there's less, like you said, less people opposed to these policies now than there has been. But I think I don't know. I think there was a significant shift in recent years with Republicans, right wing Americans, kind of being against the wars in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a lot of them are against this policy of arming Ukraine. Unfortunately, a lot of them, I think, are going to be all in about, Taiwan and China. So it's really just a matter of kind of fostering that, those feelings that people have, that I think for a lot of people, it's instinctual to be against war, but
Mm-hmm.
then they get flooded with all this propaganda. And then, they think they're on the right side when they're supporting, U.S. involvement in a war. So that's kind of the propaganda battle that we're fighting. And yeah, it's just really a matter of getting the message out to more people. And what we do, which I really like about antiwar.com, is that, we're libertarians, the whole staff pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
More right leaning myself personally than most people, but I just, I'm doing just kind of single issue stuff where if people like listen to my podcast or read my articles, they don't really know. It definitely comes through that I'm libertarian, but I try to just kind of appeal to everybody that has that non-interventionist anti-war instinct in their bones, and I think that's important. And I think I've been having some success over the past year, more so just getting, noticed by more people. And like I said, we have a lot of big people that use our stuff, that read us every day, like Ron Paul and even Noam Chomsky. He wrote us a fundraising letter, and Pat Buchanan reads us every day. Like, it's just such a big. So that's what's really cool about antiwar.com, is that so many journalists and people use us as a resource.
Yeah, which is why everybody should check the website out. Now, you mentioned China, and I'm kind of a little bit right of center, like you are, maybe. And I hear a lot, China is really the problem. China controls this, and this whole provocation with Taiwan. I think there was an Air Force general that might have actually been on your site that says
That's
that
up now.
we're going to be at war with China by 2025. Dave, I mean, how much more can we take? I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely unsettling, because that general, he's a 4-star general in the Air Force, the head of Air Mobility Command. They're the transportation guys. So they're not really going to be fighting, but still, it's concerning. And we see a lot of this rhetoric from military officials, and I've seen it for a few years, especially the ones in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific Command, they call it now. And the generals over in Japan, they've been talking about how they're preparing for war with China for a few years. And it's something really that should be unthinkable, just because the US and China were so intertwined. Although have been some pretty big sanctions that Biden's been putting on, and Trump, started the trade war with China, but there's still a long way to go. That, if we actually end up in a war with China, I mean, it could really hurt our economy. So I would like to think that would prevent it for now. But, you have a lot of people, you're talking about, the opposition to this stuff in Washington. Unfortunately, like Josh Hawley is the best example, senator, and he voted against NATO expansion. He says he's against arming Ukraine, I think, but he wrote a letter to Blinken saying, hey, all these weapons that we're sending to Ukraine, send them over to Taiwan. Oh. And so he's all about, they just passed the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act that was just signed into law. It includes military aid for Taiwan for the first time ever, because the U.S., since they cut off relations with Taiwan in 1979 as part of opening up with China, the U.S. always sold them weapons, but they never financed the purchases. So now they're going to get some loans to buy new U.S. weapons, and China responded by launching big drills around the island. So as the U.S. continues to give support to Taiwan like this, it's going to just raise tensions in the region and anger China more, because it's an issue that is always going to be more important to China than the US. And they have a lot of reason not to invade Taiwan. They trade, over $100 billion each year, I think, in trade across the strait. Just the invasion, like a big amphibious invasion, it would be such an undertaking, and like they could really get bogged down. But if the US keeps poking them like this, something's going to happen eventually. And at the same time, it also emboldens, the people in Taiwan, the more independence leaning people, to be more independence minded. It's such a weird situation that Taiwan technically doesn't consider itself to be an independent country, although they act as one. But if they declared independence, that's something that China basically always said would, trigger a war. So more U.S. support toward that end, they could declare independence. So it's just a messy situation, and kind of the weird situation that it is has worked since 1979. What they call the status quo, like the U.S. not recognizing Taiwan but selling them some weapons and trading with China. But now they've changed that in the past few years, starting under Trump. Really, they started really escalating support for Taiwan, and China is not happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's another war that if we begin, it doesn't seem to have a very good outcome. None of them ever do, Dave. So it's just a matter of, if we start it, like Afghanistan, we start, and then 20 years later, it kind of ends and gets over with, and there's still some very, I guess, toxic loose ends there as well, and all this stuff just continues on. I mean, people don't even know where some of these countries are, where we're constantly doing maneuvers or doing small things, but for those people, the people live there, some of these things are catastrophic and just horrific. But what's our beef? What's our beef with China? If some people on the right are like, okay, it's human rights issues in China. It's that Trump used to say things like, hey, they ate our lunch and all this stuff because of the trade deficit, and so it's economic more than anything else, and it's because America has become very dependent on all these other countries. But yet, this whole America First policy that you hear all the time, it kind of takes a back seat in some ways. It's like we've got to go over there and set things right. And for me, I know a lot about China. I would say, let's not mess with China. Let's just work on ourselves, mind our own business. It's like a principle that the founding fathers and Ron Paul and some people that I obviously respect a lot say, hey, we shouldn't really, we're tangling with Russia, poking the bear there. So what do you think the main beef is with China? Is it human rights stuff, or what is it?
Well, I think when it comes to, the people, the American, like neocons and people shaping the foreign policy, it's really just about, they want to control basically the world, and China is becoming a regional power, and they might threaten U.S., control of that part of the world. I think that's really all it comes down to. And then there is also the trade stuff, and there are right-wing, America First Republicans that want more protectionism when it comes to China. And that's one thing, not that I'm for that, but I could understand it. But unfortunately, you can't ignore, if you ignore all the U.S. military buildup that's happening right now in Southeast Asia, right around China. If we, if we decouple our economies, we're going to end up going to war with them because of this buildup. So you can't ignore, one without the other. So there's all, and then the human rights stuff. I mean, that's just what they use to get people on board. There's certainly, is stuff that China does that's not good, but China is a huge country, and I don't know too much about China, but from the basic things that I understand about it, and people I know that are China experts or Chinese people, is that people in China are nationalists, and there's this false idea that you get that they're kind of yearning to be free by, Americans. This is something you get a lot on the right with people like Steve Bannon that they want regime change in China. If it's a foreign threat, they're going to rally around their government and become much more nationalist. So it's just not like a country that the U.S. can really change.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is different than like Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other places. Same thing with Russia. Like the consequences of a war with them, aren't just going to be felt with the people that live there. It's going to become, it could really have bad impacts on the entire world, especially if nukes are used. I mean, obviously, but just in general, like if China and the US, the two world's largest economies, go to war, man, it's not going to be good for anybody. And I can't see like an end game where, they invade China and occupy it and until a new, and make a new government or something like that. It's just not a good situation.
Yeah, I mean, China is not. Do you think they're a national security threat? Like I mean, because every country on this planet right now has the capability of basically spying on the other country and knowing what they're up to. But there's almost this sense of, like, hey, they're going to use some kind of high-tech weapon on us. Russia is probably going to use some kind of a, electronic, magnetic, whatever, EMP weapon or something. I mean, I get a little bit it's almost as if there's this constant like tension that we always have to have. Like we can't just let countries be. All right, and by the way, there are human rights problems all over the planet that you could focus on a whole myriad of places and countries where they don't treat their citizens well, and you can look at the government and say, hey guys, you should knock this off, right? We don't like this, but it doesn't mean we're going to send troops. It's not. So it's just bizarre to me how we just continually, is it because we're running our economy on this wartime footing all the time? Like we have to fund and finance these military industrial complex entities that are just constantly, like, their stocks go up. You hear, hey, we might go to war in China. Oh, see what happened to Raytheon today. And, you've got your Congress people running to, buy stock. Not that they've ever done that, right, Nancy Pelosi? But you know what I'm saying, right? Is this just because we don't know how to do anything anymore? Like we're just going to have this military-based economy?
Well, I mean, that's what it seems like. And, I'm not too much of like a big picture guy when I try to think like, why is this all happening? Why are they funding this war in Ukraine? Why are they building up in Southeast Asia? Besides, again, kind of that ideology that I think is something, a lot of Biden administration officials believe that they should control the world, that the United States should dominate the globe. But besides that, it is really the military industrial complex. I mean, I can't really think of any other reason why, if you just look at what we have happening here, I mean, of course you have the think tanks funded by the arms makers that make these reports saying, oh, China's going to do all this horrible stuff. We have to, let's say they're going to, triple their nuclear arsenal in 10 years or quadruple. They're saying they're going to quadruple it. Well, that means the U.S. has to modernize its nuclear arsenal. We can't get rid of any nukes. And that plan to modernize the entire nuclear triad is like $1.5 trillion. So that's just such a huge amount of money. There's so many people making money there. So that could just be the main driving force. Like sometimes I think maybe it's not that simple. Like there's something more sinister at play. But then at the same time, you see who's running the Pentagon. Lloyd Austin was on the board of Raytheon before he joined. And now they're shipping all these Raytheon-made weapons to Ukraine. A lot of them were obsolete. They weren't even making them anymore. Like the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, they didn't make them for years. Now they got all these there's this whole new demand for these missiles.
Yeah.
And,
they're just trying to clear out the old inventory or something to make way for new stuff.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And that's what they're telling, the Eastern European countries, the former Soviet republics. They tell them, send all your Soviet stuff to Ukraine, buy some new American stuff. They're giving them money to do that, military aid to buy new American weapons.
Yeah. Definitely
Yeah.
should have gotten into. I got into the wrong business, Dave. I should have
Yeah.
been somehow involved in one of these companies. I'd be pretty sad. I don't know about my conscience, but I guess it doesn't really matter much these days for most people. Before I
Yeah.
let you go, because I know you're a busy man, I don't want to keep you too long. Um, Israel is, I
Mhm.
think, back at it again. There's been some interesting developments with possible drone strikes. Do you know anything about that? What's going on over there in, is it Iran where this is
Yeah. Yeah. So over the weekend, I think there was a lot of kind of fake news flying around about it because
happening?
um,
No,
it
really?
made it seem like on Saturday night that like Iran was under attack, like there was attacks all over the country. But I think one of the original reports came from this site, Iran International. I don't know if you're familiar with them,
No.
but they're like Saudi funded, and they're said to. I think Mossad is involved with them too, and
Okay.
that's from an Israeli journalist, a pretty mainstream Israeli journalist who said that. So they put a lot of bad information out about Iran, and then of course Twitter, when took off with it. But there was, it looks like, an Israeli drone attack on a military facility, like a ammunition factory. It was something like that. Small, like quadcopter drones. And Iran said, they shot most of them down, and there was just an explosion and minor damage. But Israel has done this before. They did it in 2022, similar drone attack. They have a long history of covert operations inside Iran, assassinating, their nuclear scientists, blowing up their nuclear facilities, placing explosives in them. So on one hand, it's nothing new, but that doesn't really, it's still significant. This is the first time under Netanyahu's new government that they attacked Iran. And this also comes in the backdrop of the US has just been increasing sanctions on Iran, even threatening to attack them. Same thing with Israel. And the US and Israel just launched like their largest ever military exercises, joint military exercises. They just did that last week, which is clearly, meant as a message to Iran. So while everybody's focused on Ukraine, I mean, for good reason, tensions between Israel, the US, and Iran are really getting high right now. And so something could always, pop off over there. And there was also reports of airstrikes in Syria, on the Iraq-Syria border, that were probably Israeli. They've launched similar strikes on a convoy entering Syria.
Hmm.
They say, they're weapon shipments, but then the local reports say they're not weapons. So who really knows? But it probably is Israel that's doing that. And then so there's a lot going on. And then in Israel itself, violence just exploded.
Yeah.
There was a raid in the West Bank that killed 9 Palestinians, or I think another one died, so 10.
Yeah.
And then there was a shooting in East Jerusalem. A Palestinian, killed a few settlers. I think 7 Israeli settlers. And then, that it's just a mess right now. There's all these settler attacks on Palestinians, and there's some flare up in Gaza. So I think that could get really bad
Is
over
that, you
there.
think that's a response to the new Netanyahu government? They're thinking it's going to go back to sort of that very aggressive, hawkish.
Hmm.
Um, it's just, it seemed that it was, I don't want to say it was calm, but it was quieter for a while. And you mentioned Syria, and it sounds like might be another, might have another proxy war going on between Russia and Israel. I mean, I don't see, it's hard to follow all this stuff. That's why I had you on, Dave, because
Hmm.
there's always so much to talk about with all this war stuff.
Yeah, the Syria Israel thing is a weird situation because under the last government, I mean, they were bombing Syria pretty frequently. They do it usually like a few times a month,
Wow.
and they've been doing it for years. And Russia kind of lets them do it. They have like an understanding with Russia, even though Syria is Russia's ally.
Right.
And I don't really know like what the dynamics of that are. I mean, they probably know they can't just attack Israel, and they do have good relations with Israel.
Mhm.
Well, they were strained a little bit over Ukraine, but Israel still hasn't sent Ukraine any weapons that we know of, at least.
Mhm.
So that's always kind of been happening. But with Netanyahu, it could definitely ramp up. He's very hawkish, and
Yeah.
the situation in the West Bank, I mean, actually, the past year, 2022, was one of the most violent years in the West Bank since like the early 2000s. So it
So
was kind of building up.
yeah.
And then with this new government came in and they did that big raid, it kind of just exploded.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just everywhere. It seems like there's just everything is escalating.
Yeah, it must have been the reporting that I'm not seeing is why I might have thought it was quieter for a while. I guess
Yeah.
I gotta check your website out more often. So, Dave DeCamp, thank you for being here. Obviously, antiwar.com. What's your Twitter handle if people want to follow you over on Twitter?
It's at DeCamp Dave. And yeah, and check out antiwar.com. You'll see my work in the news section up top. And then I also have the YouTube show, and there's also an audio version, Anti-War News. And it's a daily update, like 20 to 30 minutes each day of pretty much all the news articles that I write in a day.
Yeah.
Try to condense it for you.
And yeah, and you're doing like straight news, not a lot of editorial commentary, just throwing the information out there and just letting people figure out for themselves what to think about it. Dave,
Yeah.
thanks so much for being here on the show. Maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me on.
All right.